The F-16 70mm has been the intro to jets for an entire generation of pilots. It's super beginner friendly, very stable, and very easy to fly too. It's a delta wing with fixed stabs, so it's basically a cheat code for high alpha, so you can see why people learn to fly jets with it. Freewing has flipped the paradigm with the F-16 70mm version 3. Unlike version 2 or other 70mm F-16s, this jet has full flying stabilators, just like the full scale and just like bigger model F-16s, and by design, this is no longer a beginner level jet. It could be friendly to new pilots, but not with the throws I'm using here. Don't emulate my setup unless you've got some decent experience flying. I don't want a beginner's jet, I want a 70mm crotch rocket that flies like a 3D jet, so I picked up the ARF from motionrc and tossed my old Freewing motor into it. I'll cover setup and all that later in the vid. What I want to talk about right now is how awesome it is to finally have a small jet with full flying stabs. This is a dream come true for me. The full potential of the platform is now finally unlocked, and if you drop a 20 for the upgraded AGF servos, you'll see what I mean. The stabs can deflect to some absurd angles, giving it the authority to do backflips within its own fuselage. Or front flips if that's your thing. Get the center of gravity further back if you can handle it, and it'll be even more impressive. What I did notice is that it doesn't seem to track as straight as the other 70mm F-16s that I've flown. This means that I need to increase the pitch gains a little to help keep it stabilized. Artificial stability doesn't do much if it isn't being used right, and whoever tells you not to fly with a gyro has no idea what they're talking about. This jet requires a gyro to fly like this. I barely moved the stick on the first flight and it went vertical instantly. I know some guys have this weird machismo around not flying with a gyro, but I don't care what they think. The full scale can't fly without a gyro, and my hot-rodded F-16 can't fly well without one. Speaking of flying well, it wouldn't be much of an F-16 if it couldn't perform a high alpha pass. I had this jet flying circuits in the narrow runway corridor without worrying about a stall. Like most near or post-stall maneuvers, high alpha is best performed with a lightweight battery. Most of the flying that you're seeing here in this vid is on a 3600 SMC high voltage battery. It's just the right amount of weight with a decent amount of flight time too. Upright high alpha is super stable and it's relatively easy, but where it gets tricky is inverted high alpha. Just entering it is kind of nerve-wracking. The jet tries to nose down to the ground instantly the moment you flip it over, and you've got to be fast on the stick to get it to stay level. With more practice on this airframe, I could make the transitions look less sloppy, but what I care about is getting the maneuver performed, so it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to get flown. High alpha is a specialty of the F-16, and this jet performs it exceptionally well. Aside from the sloppy entrance into inverted high alpha, it handles like a dream with no major rudder work needed to steer. It's very reminiscent of the e-flite 80mm F-16 in this configuration. High alpha performance also lends itself towards easy landings with the nose held up, even with the flaps dropped. Don't hesitate to experiment and learn. This jet is inexpensive in ARF form and not terribly expensive in plug-and-play form. The roll rate is pretty good with flaperons only, but you get drill bit rolls and the ability to maneuver slower with differential stabilators, aka ailerons. Set them up so they correct for roll and pitch, and you've got a miniature full-scale F-16 on your hand. You can actually see the AS3X system correcting both roll and pitch while I crank the gains up for super stable high alpha passes. It is so cool to watch in action. The F-16 has narrow landing gear, so takeoff and landing can be a bit tricky if you're not used to a jet that can tip over if you're heavy on the rudder. Smoothly apply throttle and rotate into the air once it's picked up enough speed on the ground. If you're too fast on the throttle, the weight of the jet will shift to the nose wheel, which will cause the jet to want to swap ends and flip over. You'll want to consider programming flaperons by running both ailerons directly to the receiver, which will help shorten the takeoff roll significantly and help with landings too. Landings are super easy with flaperons. Drop flaps, drop gear, point at the runway, float in with almost no power. It's predictable and consistent. Flaperons work wonders on this jet, most likely because the wing area of the Freewing F-16 is noticeably smaller than the FMS and e-flite versions, so flaperons help significantly to get the wings to bite into the air. You can also land without flaps by holding the nose up and keeping some power on the backside of the throttle stick to regulate the descent rate. The wing area being a bit smaller makes this trickier than it is with bigger F-16s, but it's completely doable. Once you touch down, slowly pull the elevator stick to use the stabs as giant air brakes. It'll come to a stop real quick with no thrust reverse required. The gear are interesting, and definitely they're my least favorite part of this jet. They got the stabilators right, but the gear are just not as good as the FMS or e-flite F-16s. The nose wheel is wobbly and the suspension is pretty stiff, and as usual, the wheels sound pretty bad because they're hard foam, so the stiff suspension doesn't really do much for the jet on pavement. It's actually probably pretty decent on grass if that's what you're flying from, or you can just do what I did and hand toss it because it's got more than enough power to fly. Unless you've got the precision of a professional pilot, you're probably going to tip this plane over on the ground. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The missile rails will be the first thing to get scraped up. The stabilators can also get scraped too, and expect the wooden ventral fins to start showing signs of being dragged across pavement. It's an F-16. This kind of thing happens. Let's cover the basics of setup. For the center of gravity, I recommend that you don't push the battery too far back. 20 to 40 millimeters behind the CG marks is enough to fly close to neutral without being crazy. I went above and beyond here and pushed all the wiring to the back, and that made it even worse. My first takeoff was basically tail heavy, and the gyro was the only thing keeping it in the air. I had removed the blue box in the front so I could get all of the wiring as aft as possible to help with the center of gravity, but I ended up moving the receiver back up front. The receiver being up front with the wiring gives you more options for battery placement, instead of having to place it just barely hanging off the strap as far forward as it can sit. I replaced the stabilator servos with AGF-RC units and used the longest servo arm in the package to get maximum possible throws. The link is in the description if you want to upgrade the jet to reach its full potential. The flaperon and rudder linkages were kept the same. I tossed in a Spektrum 8360T receiver, then set up a trimmable nose wheel and dampened the nose wheel input using a curved mix. If you join our Discord server, check the Setup Guides channel for more info on how to do this. I've been waiting for an F-16 like this for so long, and I think the market can have a beginner-oriented fixed stab F-16 option and a slightly less beginner-oriented F-16 with full flying stabs that guys like me can modify to do backflips and fly like a 3D jet. This F-16 is a perfect balance between scale detail, wing loading, and fun. It's just fun. I don't care if it has a ton of cubes loaded onto the wings, I care about how fun it is to fly, and this F-16 fits the bill. The jet isn't prone to stalling out even in post-stall maneuvers while holding the stabs up fully. It's inexpensive and a hell of a lot of fun. Pick one up from motionrc, you won't regret it. This one earns a solid 9.5 out of 10 from us. We also recently started working with KMRC to demo their Afterburner systems, and being some of the lightest and most inexpensive out there, they're a solid choice for you. The burners are super easy to install with zip ties on 70mm motors like this F-16, and on bigger jets they screw right into the mounting holes on the back of the motor while keeping the venting holes clear for hot air to escape the motor assembly. They basically fit almost any motor out there, and now they come with a low voltage alarm along with being programmable for both color type and what throttle setting you want to activate it at. Check out KMRC burners in the description and let us know what you think in the comments. See you guys next time.